Welcome to Leg 7 of the Race to Replace. Every week we dig into the Liberal leadership race where 4 candidates now duke it out for the ultimate prize. The winner gets to trash talk Donald Trump on Twitter on behalf of Canadians whenever we win a hockey tournament. You can look it up. It's in the Constitution. That's part of the job. I am the master of the house, Dan Arnold. With me, as always, the guy who brings a calculator to a knife fight, Tyler Meredith, and a woman who knows exactly to the cent how much a basket of groceries costs, Vandana Kattar. We are recording this immediately after the English debate, so it's going to be a late night for us here tonight. Tyler V, you've got the Red Bull. You're ready for a late night of podcasting?
Yeah, I've got my favorite coffee.
I'm exhausted because last night I also analyzed the CBC, like the Power and Politics, the French debates. And then my son, who was sick, decided to sleep with me and was sleeping it was like sleeping next to a buffalo on cocaine. So I'm on no sleep. I'm on fumes. So I'll be a little cranks, but we'll be good.
So, Vandana, are you telling me that I should send you my 11-year-old chocolate lab because he just sleeps all day?
No, I don't. Yes, if it sleeps all day.
I feel like the debates would have been more interesting if they released a buffalo on cocaine into the debate studio. That might have spiced it up a little.
We're gonna catch you off guard, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, this can actually happen in the campaign.
All right. So while this is our debate reaction episode, I think we've got to start with the big story of the week, though, because there's a bigger news story in the Liberal leadership race.
Are people ready for that, Dan?
Than the debates. I know it's sad. It's sad. But Ruby Dalla has been disqualified.
Dr. Ruby
from
Dalla.
the race. Dr. Ruby is out. What does this mean? I think the impact could be seismic. Ruby Dalla has been considered a major threat to win the leadership by Ruby Dalla. Not much by anybody else in the race, it's fair to say. So I guess it maybe doesn't really change anything at the end of the day. But the one thing it does change is that we sadly have to retire one of our favorite segments on the podcast, Ruby or Pierre, where I give a quote of something salacious that was said over the past week, and you guys have to guess if it was said by Ruby Dalla or Pierre Poilievre. So sadly, Ruby or Pierre is no more, but we will premiere a new segment this week, which I call Ruby or Patrick. And this is where I'll read an allegation of someone who broke election finance rules. And you have to guess if this was a violation of the rules that was committed by Ruby Dalla in 2025 or Patrick Brown in 2022. So, are we ready to play Ruby or Patrick?
Okay. I have to jump in here. I'm just wanting to let you both know that I'm getting word from our legal team that they might not be totally comfortable with the segment, so we might have to.
They don't like Dan Unleashed. I like Dan Unleashed, but I guess the legal team can't handle it.
No.
All right, fair enough.
I have to say though, Patrick Brown always shows up in some shady business. You always know that there's something interesting going on, whether it's who he is endorsing in Mississauga or what he's doing, with Ruby Dalla. There's always some interesting stuff there.
All right. So at the lawyer's request, we will not do Ruby or Patrick this week. We will wish Ruby well in her future career as a Rebel Media correspondent, and we will move on to talk about what we actually want to talk about tonight, which is the Liberal leadership debates. We had Monday night in Montreal in French, en français, and then we had Tuesday night in Montreal in English. And as mentioned, we're giving our reaction immediately afterwards. So we haven't necessarily seen how the pundits are reviewing the English debate, and we haven't seen the post-debate pressers. It's kind of like in the moment reaction, how we felt about it. I think if we kind of just start talking, it's going to get a little bit off kilter here. So like Hannah Thibodeau, I will be very strict in terms of how we set this up here tonight. So I think I want to start and sort of give a bit of each of us can talk a bit about what the big take home is. I think maybe start with the English debate. Like, what was the big take home? What's the headline from the English debate? And then we can go candidate by candidate, and we can kind of talk about both nights for Carney, for Freeland, for Gould, maybe for Bayless. And then I think we'll talk a bit more about the French debate afterwards, and then kind of wrap it all up. And then we'll have a special 30-minute deep dive on productivity by Tyler Meredith, which I think, that was, the Liberal Party felt
you
that was
can check the notes of where that starts if you guys want, listeners.
I mean, the Liberal Party seemed to feel that was a hot topic. That was a key segment in the debate tonight. They felt Canadians really wanted to hear about productivity. So we're going to give people what they want and have that deep dive. So Tyler, get ready for that.
I understand from Dan's polling, it's not what people want, but okay.
No, but can I just say, I actually think maybe they listened to our podcast because they also had a really deep dive on defense, which sounded a lot like some of the stuff that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. But there was some very substantive discussions throughout all of this stuff. So we'll get into it.
Okay. Well, how about start with you, Vandana? What's your take home? If you had to kind of do a headline from the debate tonight, what did it boil down to for you?
Candid share ideas. I would say most of this campaign, I haven't seen a lot of, I mean, and this is funny, I'm not the policy person. So this is like, even I'm saying this, but like, there hasn't been a lot of conversation around ideas. I think mainly because this is the way it's been set up. There's not a lot of interaction between candidates. They've been doing most posts and things, small events, not a lot of like, they had big rallies and small, and like some small events, but not a place where you can really share ideas, not like a campaign style type of, like a traditional like campaign style type of idea sharing. So I actually felt in this debate, and I actually see debates. I mentioned this last week as I think I did on like they're actually comms exercises, like quick clips, things you can use for ads, things you can use for social media and to gather for all. I actually felt people got really nerdy and into ideas, and I think
Super
that
nerdy.
yes. And so that justifies what I said because Tyler agreed with me. But like I would say, so I found that if you were really want to get into what people were thinking, what candidates were thinking, I actually felt the debate really showcased. Everyone put out their plans. They got into granular details on things like productivity, on interprov relations, on a number of things. So I think my headline is that you actually got to hear a lot of ideas from all the candidates.
Yeah, I don't think there were a lot of like different ideas or radically
Yeah,
different ideas,
yeah,
but certainly we unpacked all the nuances of the positions. I think part of the problem for me in the debate tonight is the first 45 minutes were basically on Trump and tariffs, and they all
yeah.
basically have the
Say the
same
same thing.
position. So we
Yes.
we had an argument over like,
Well, I mean,
is it going to be
Bayless did
orange juice tariffs or is it going to be like
Fruit
cheese
czar. Fruit
tariffs?
czar.
And
He's gonna
like,
have a fruit czar.
yeah.
Bayless did say that he would go down and get a deal with Scheinbaum. That was probably the only point of
That was the only change. Yeah.
differentiation.
All right, Tyler, what's your headline from the debate
Yeah.
tonight?
So before I get to how to evaluate it, I just want to say, I think in our last episode, we both or all three of us talked about what we would be expecting the debates would bring, and I thought this was actually it ended up actually very different than certainly what my
Mhm.
expectations were. I thought that the debate was going to do two things. One, it would get them into the rhythm of testing themselves of what the format of a debate would look like if one of them succeeds to be the leader, as to what the consortium debate is going to feel like, and to get some practice under their belt because they're not going to have a lot of time when we get into a general election, likely very soon. But the second piece would be that they would also be able to distinguish themselves as like the person who can show to both the party and to the country, this is how we're going to prosecute a narrative against Polyev. I think we got the first piece of that, which is we got the training. They all got a good training and a good outing, and it felt like an actual debate stage. It had good production values. I don't think we got the second piece. I think they talked a lot to each other about how they agree on certain things. They did define, especially today compared to the French debate, much more their points of differentiation in a few places with the Trudeau legacy, and also the things which Karina really went at a few times as to actually what about the Trudeau legacy we believe in and want to defend, which we can talk about. But I don't feel like there was a very strong differentiation point with Polyev, right? A few times you got the candidate saying he won't stand up for Canada, he will imitate Trump, he doesn't understand our values, but you didn't hear that sustained narrative of how we're going to push back against either the pivot that Polyev has recently started on Canada First, or even the Canada's broken stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like, especially in the French debate, nobody really went at Polyev at all. And maybe that makes
No.
sense. I mean, Quebec is different. They're not the main competition there, though nobody really went at Blanchet or the Bloc either. But
Yeah.
tonight I saw a bit more of that. I think Carney probably did the best job in the English debate, contrasting with Polyev. He took a couple shots at him and set himself up a bit more against Polyev. But you're right. I didn't really leave the debate with a understanding of like what is the liberal campaign narrative against Pierre Poilievre if each of these people wins the next election.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
I also don't think there was like as much as they got the idea of debating, I think there's a lot of like, I agree with, I agree with, I agree with. Especially in French. They were a bit more spicier today. But I just don't I think like going against Blanchette he's a very good debater. I think
Yeah,
Poliev will probably be the same and way more aggressive, and I don't think they got that practice. So I hope whoever wins, that will be like a key thing for their debate team to kind of
totally.
focus on.
So I'll toss my take home from the debate, and maybe I'll start getting into kind of how the candidates did then. And this is what I'll sort of put as a proposition on the table here. To me, this felt like a debate that was largely between two different approaches. Mark Carney being the technocrat who will get things done and fix the economy versus Karina Gould, who is more the people politician. And then it also sort of set up as Carney being the centrist versus Karina being more of the progressive, a bit more proud of the Trudeau government's record.
Yeah.
And I really felt like Chrystia Freeland kind of got lost a bit in the shuffle there. Like I have a long, big page of notes here that I was taking during the debate, and by the 15-minute left mark, I started going through my notes, and I had like one thing or two things that Chrystia Freeland said that actually caught my attention. I just didn't really I don't feel like she jumped off the page as much tonight. If you look at the Google
Mm.
search trends for the night too, Bayliss, Gould, Carney, all about the same. Freeland was about half as many as them. So that's kind of how I saw it as a take home from the debate. I definitely got a big contrast kind of between Gould and Carney,
Yeah.
and I'm not really sure where Freeland fits into that.
So I would say two things about Krisha. I think and this is obviously like the eyes of a practitioner and someone who's worked with her, but her rhythm tonight in her manner of speaking, it wasn't perfect, but it was much better than I've seen of her, frankly, in years, because she has often this very halting style of how she talks that I think some people it grates on them and it turns them off. She seemed to be much more fluid and comfortable. I also think she said at the end of the debate, I feel liberated in this campaign. I'm able to kind of be myself, obviously an allusion to how she brought down the prime minister. I think there was a bit of that came through, especially the section on foreign policy. She really had spent time because this is something that she knows. She thinks a lot about, thinking about our geopolitical alliances, which countries we want to partner with, how we would do that, how we would create an alternative path outside of the United States. That is really her, right? That is classic her. I don't think it amounts to anything. I don't think that it buys her anything. I think you're right, Dan, that she had difficulty tonight getting noticed, but she's a better. What I saw today was a better Chrystia Freeland, probably the best Chrystia Freeland I've seen in years.
Forgive me, listeners, as I pull the old switcheroo. I'm taking a break from our regularly scheduled Tell Us Health story from our longtime presenting sponsor to update you on an important development in the wholesale wireline internet saga we talked about most of last fall and early winter. Spoiler alert, it's good news for consumers. It looks like Minister Champagne and his team deserve a gentle pat on the back. I say that because there are real results from the government's efforts to bring down internet prices in Canada. According to StatsCan, since 2019, gigabit access has jumped from 61.1% to 83.1% of households. Household internet data usage has doubled, and real prices have dropped by 20%. These improvements are narrowing the digital divide across the country. The government's plan looks like it's working, with increased competition, especially in Ontario and Quebec, led by companies like TELUS, driving prices down even further. Clearly, there was an appetite for it. More than 250,000 people signed TELUS's Demand More Internet Choice petition, asking for more choice and competition. Specifically, and again, these are StatsCan figures, consumers who signed up for a high-speed internet plan in January 2025 paid 2.3% less than the same month in 2024. And in Ontario, where TELUS entered the market, it was 10% less. So time to give credit where credit is due. In what is adding up to be the most challenging economic context in perhaps, well, ever. Since we left off on wholesale wireline the first week of January, Canada-US trade relations have taken a highly publicized turn, and interprovincial trade barrier policies and overall economic issues are right at the forefront. Let's hope the government can have similar success, because those files require the same fervor as bringing down internet prices. And couldn't we all use a little more good cost of living news right about now? Back to TELUS Health next week. But to learn more about high-speed internet competition and wholesale access, visit telus.com/demand more internet choice.
Yeah, so I mean, well, let's just talk about Freeland then. So let's make
Yeah.
her the first kind of subject, and we'll kind of unpack a bit how she did. Then we'll talk about the other candidates. Yeah, so I think like at least I think she had a good debate prep. So I think like whatever
Yeah.
team kind of put her through this, they said the right things to her in the sense that She did tell the stories of people that we
Hmm.
asked her to tell. Rhonda from Alberta and the 4-year-old girl who is
Sorry.
petrified about Donald
Yeah.
Trump, who we heard about 2 nights in a row.
We did that in
Actually.
2015 too. Like, I mean, that was like a key thing. Like the PM speeches had to have stories from the places we were at, like real stories. So that's like an old trick that I think that goes really well.
Yeah, I think that was good. I don't know. I feel like she really jumped off and said a lot that really caught my attention tonight. She certainly, there's the whole media speculation, I guess, coming into the debate was, is Chrystia going to attack Mark Carney and is she going to go at him?
Hmm.
And she was definitely like, even, I mean, we can argue a bit about how she did in the French debate if she was trying to like undermine him a bit in his French, but like tonight she didn't say a single like remotely contradictory thing with Carney the whole night, which I think is probably why I feel like again she can really pop off the page to me. Um, the one that I thought her best kind of run, she had a good run on tariffs. She was talking about Tesla, like tariffs on Tesla and orange juice in Wisconsin. She had a nice like that. I felt like
Yeah.
jumped out to me, and it was like a little different than what the other candidates were saying, even though again they all have basically the same position on tariffs. But she said it with a bit of fire. But then, especially in the second half of the debate, I don't know. I just didn't really get a lot that stood out from her.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and I actually, I think I did see some of those old habits. I do think she was trying to tell stories, but there was something that just got lost, and I think it's just because there was nothing new for me in it.
Yeah.
So I felt like there was nothing, like I couldn't really understand her vision that was separate from Carney's. And I think the problem she has is her ideas and her campaigns based on she's the best person for Donald Trump. And the one thing I did notice in debates is when Carney says it's a different Trump than before. And he said in the French debates, there's no response to that. Like he is more isolationist. He's like more revved up, more pro Russia, all those things. And when he says it's a different type of Trump, it's a different world, there's that same argument that I've done this before, it didn't hold, and she didn't have a response to that. So I thought that was interesting, and that kind of creates holes in her argument that she's the best one. And yeah, I didn't think anything else like stood out to me as something different from her that I'd be like, okay, like now I've seen you set apart because I feel like she's running the same campaign as Carney is. But then Carney, just given that he's new and fresh and, people haven't seen him before and different background, I think people are just more like willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on dealing with Trump.
Yeah, I think that sums it up well. Like I think and I think this is kind of where I kind of come down to on that kind of like high level. I looked at this as sort of like Carney versus Karina Gould because I think
Hmm.
Carney and Freeland just felt very similar to me in terms of what they were saying, and Carney's already sort of ahead of her, right? So like, how do you
Yeah.
differentiate yourself
Yeah.
against that? Whereas I think coming out of the debate and both nights, I guess combined, I would say like it feels to me like Karina Gould has basically claimed the progressive lane in this leadership
Yes.
race.
Hmm. Hmm.
And, she's talking about reconciliation, climate change. And, it just feels like and I think that's a good spot for her to be in because, we can argue if this is the right approach for a general election. It might not be. But in terms of a liberal membership vote, like if
Hmm.
you've got the progressive lane to yourself, like that feels like a pretty good spot to be in.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tyler.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I think you're totally right that there was an opportunity for it to be a Chrystia Carney debate. It did not turn into a Chrystia Carney debate. I think Chrystia was just trying to kind of convey her credentials and her resume and her policies. She didn't really engage Carney a lot. She didn't try to correct him or show that she knows more, which she could have done. That would have been a path potentially or a scenario to try to show like, Mark, it's a lot, government's actually a little bit more complicated than what you remember, or something like that. She didn't do any of that. And he actually went out of his way a number of times to say, I agree with Chrystia, right?
Hmm.
Which I think validates the point that we've all kind of made here, which is that they're fishing a lot from the same pond. And so
Yeah.
Karina has the most differentiation. I did hear Chrystia, interestingly though, say a couple times references to rural Canada, which if you go back to what her strategy is of how she's going to
Yeah.
somehow have a path to 17,000 and change in points that she needs to win, it's going to be particularly in Western Canada and other parts of the country where we don't hold seats. Where we know from Keto's polling in the 2 waves that he's done, she is doing a bit better. It's the one part of the country where she is doing a bit better. And I thought that was interesting strategically, but there was not a huge number of standout moments. Again, I think if you followed Chrystia Freeland up to now, the only 2 things that you probably took away from it are she really went on a run to talk about Trump because that's an area of pride. Although I think we all know that Alex Kohut's research has also showed us that maybe that's not something that is a cleavage that works for her. It seems to work for Carney. But secondly, she wanted to really just tell her own story, and I'm not sure that it popped through in the debate tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Also, shame on you. You keep bringing up other pollsters in front of Dan.
That's the
I'm
yeah. So
teasing.
I think I mean we could talk about Ipsos Reid's latest poll if we want to. That was a real banger today, but we won't. That was we'll focus on the debate. Um, yeah, I think it's a good point, Tyler, because she put out a video on social media like 2 days
Yeah.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
That
The
was
horse.
basically
The horse.
talking
Yeah.
about like she's riding horses. She's talking
River.
about growing up on a farm from Peace River,
Yeah.
which I thought was great. Like, and this is what she should have done like 8 years ago, and like really kind of like branded herself as this like daughter of
Totally.
Peace River.
Humanize
Um,
herself.
but I just kind of feel like it was she did mention it tonight, but it wasn't like the central story she was telling. Like I think I would have just like
Yeah.
led with that as the opening statement. I felt honestly like all 4 of the opening and closing statements I didn't think were that good. They all felt kind of scripted, and I felt all the candidates were much better, kind of like in the free flow parts of the debate. And I think it would have been actually like a somewhat attention grabbing for her to get up there and be like, "Hey, this is my story as the daughter of Peace River," and like that could have maybe leapt off the page a little bit more.
I think all that could have been her strategy. Her differentiation from Carney is that I had the experience, but I'm also just an everyday person. I've grew up on a farm. I grew up with very little. I know people across the prairies. I know people who are struggling. And I think that could have been her differentiator, but she focused more on Trump and tariffs.
If you've been listening to recent episodes, you've heard from Simon and Hamas, Airbnb hosts sharing their spare room to help make ends meet as the cost of living continues to rise across Canada. What you might not know is that Airbnb is not only a lifeline for local hosts, it's also helping to drive the tourism economy in communities from coast to coast to coast. In 2023, travel on Airbnb generated more than $10 billion in estimated economic impact across Canada and helped support nearly 110,000 jobs. Airbnb is also helping to disperse travel to all parts of the country. More than 1,700 Canadian cities and towns welcomed guests on Airbnb in 2023, often in areas underserved by traditional hotels. So they help drive economic activity in places guests might otherwise not be able to visit, strengthening and growing Canada's diverse tourism industry. The economic impact estimates are based on an in-plan cloud analysis. Learn more about how Airbnb supports tourism across Canada at airbnb.com/Canada Economic Impact.
Do you want to talk about Mark Carney?
Sure.
How do people think he did tonight? Who wants to go?
I mean, I think he still needs a lot of practice when it comes to debate. Debating Pierre Poilievre, Blanchette is going to be very different from what he saw today. I also felt that I know we're talking about French debates afterwards, but because he couldn't get his ideas out in full in a second language that he's still, I think, fully trying to practice and dust off the cobwebs for. I think he was trying to really get in there and showcase his ideas. But I think while he did well in terms of he came out with his ideas, I think the issue is they were taking too long, so it ate up all his time. And it was hard to get a quick clip from him. He sounded bureaucratic at times. That human element. Now, that being said, the counter to that is that it's perhaps what, for a broader vote base, what Canadians want right now. Like you mentioned early on in the podcast, Dan, that people like he's kind of Harper-esque. I would say like maybe even Paul Martin, Chrétien, like that type of like what people are seeing now is a different type of leader than they've seen the last 10 years, right? And I think it could work for him where people just want like, yeah, maybe up against Pierre Poilievre, if he's hyperbolic on the debate stage and Carney just looks calm, people might just hand it to Carney and be like, I'd rather give my trust to you. But I think from a comms perspective and an operations perspective, I was worried that he wasn't getting enough of his points in to really like, and I would worry that would read as he was struggling rather than him just trying to put forward like his fulsome ideas.
So the interesting thing is, obviously he exuded a huge degree of calmness on the stage, right? Like he was very poised and measured and slow in the way he was talking. In some ways, I would say a good way, because I think if to Vandana, to your point about like if you're looking for reassurance, he felt in control, right, of his emotions and what he was trying to say. Now, I grant you, he didn't get all the points across that he wanted to, but on a certain level, like there is I think there's an emotive value in trying to do that. What was interesting though is like I noticed across the country that there were lots of different watch parties happening, right? That MPs were sponsoring, that campaigns were sponsoring, and I have to think to myself, if I'm sitting at the watch party in Newfoundland that Joanne Thompson was organizing, that Seamus O'Regan was at, if I'm there, am I like cheering at a particular moment of like, yeah, Carney really nailed it, right? It's like, I don't think that moment happened. I'm gonna bet I don't think that moment happened in that particular room, right? And that's fine, maybe. But I think, if we think about this moment, right? And Dan, you referenced, some of the polling, like there's this sense of momentum of where, maybe there's actually now a chance to beat the Conservatives and to stop Poilievre. And I think if we're gonna actually crystallize in that moment, whoever the leader is has to be able to bring the energy right to that moment. And I didn't see, certainly from Carney, I didn't see it. I saw a bit of it from Karina, although I'm not sure that Karina has the path to victory. But my point is, like, in a general, they're going to need to have more energy than we saw on the stage tonight.
Yeah, it was pretty lackluster.
Yeah, I think from Carney's perspective, I kind of come down where you do, Vandana. We've talked about this, a couple of weeks ago. Like he's never going to be Justin Trudeau in a
No.
debate, right? Like
No.
he shouldn't try to be, right? And I think
I don't think he wants to be.
Yeah,
No, there's value in not being Justin Trudeau.
yeah, and that's what we talked about a couple of weeks
Yeah.
ago, right? Like I think the appeal of Mark Carney is that he looks and sounds very different from Justin Trudeau, and people want change. And I think maybe he looks and sounds different from Pierre Poilievre as well too right now, in the sense that Poilievre's like got the buzzwordy catchphrase, axe the tax slogans, and
Yeah.
Carney is the technocratic banker who is prosecuting his case, and every answer has got like 4 points, and point one, this is this, and point two is this, and even his body language, like he's holding the pen, and he's doing like. I just knocked my mic there, but yeah, so he's like
pen. It was a very
he's doing like
pen.
the three
Yes.
things with his pen,
Yes.
and then he's moving it around, and like I actually kind of liked his style up there because I think he does.
Yeah.
I think he does come across as being in command of the issues. He knows his shit. Like he's got it down. He's got a plan, and I think to that end, that's the right thing he wants to project. So I think that was really good. I agree with you though, Vandana, as well. I think his timing needs a bit of work. There were a couple times tonight he was even saying this. He's like, I could go on, but I'll exhaust my time. And he's like, we'll come back to this later. And he'd be like, try and cram a third point of his 3 points in instead of just like landing the 2 points fully and completely so that everybody knew it, and instead of just trying to jam too much in there. So that's something like he can work on for sure before we get to a general debate.
I think what works for him in this, as much as like, again, the comms in me is like, I'm always like, plain speak. Plain speak, plain speak. I think the thing is people will give him the benefit of the doubt. Like he's holding the pen. He looks like he's in charge. And if you may not follow anything he says because he's making it very complex and going to details, they're going to be like, you know what? You sound like you know what you're doing, which is usually the opposite of what we tell people. You know what I mean? We tell people like, keep it simple. I mean, Dan, we've talked about it for years over your research, but people might be like, you know what? That sounds right because you look smart and it sounds like you know what you're doing. So it could just work for him.
For the record, real wages actually have grown over time. Sorry, in the chat, we had a group.
Tyler's gonna be so unpopular now.
We have a group chat during the debate amongst the three of us, and there was a number of times where not just Carney, a couple of them actually kind of referenced the fact that real wages haven't kept up. they anyway. We won't get into that
And
debate.
Tyler then came back with like 6 graphs in the group chat that he
I literally
posted.
asked him, like, do you mean also like a cashier at a grocery store? And he gave me a chart. I'm like, Tyler, just yes or no, man. That's all I want to know.
So as I said, the polling would indicate we actually did some polling on this recently with Polera, and 30% of Canadians think their wages have kept up with inflation.
I'm
So,
surprised with that. It's
you know,
good.
in that respect, Carney is actually
He's right. No,
on
he's
the
right.
side of the people and how they feel, which is I think would be if I was giving a criticism of him tonight on substance. Though I think he did okay. Well, as a positive, fantastic on Trump. I think like the first half of the debate, Carney was really good, and I think the way he's dealing with the Trump issue. As we said, this is something that Chrystia kind of felt was her issue, but Carney has almost taken
Hmm.
this away from her, and his whole even
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
his whole kind of approach is like we can't predict what Donald Trump's going to do. Like this guy
Yeah.
is an insane person. So all we can do is like get our own house in order.
Yeah.
He used the maître chez nous yesterday, masters in our own house tonight.
Yeah.
And he's like, and we're going to fix these things and we're going to like, and I can handle it because I know how to deal with a crisis. And like when weird stuff like Brexit happens, like I'm there to kind of clean up the mess. And I think he's really carved out a very nice niche as like the problem solver when stuff like Trump happens. So I thought he was very good in that. As I mentioned, I like that he was attacking Polyev more than the other
Hmm.
candidates.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Where I think he was weaker tonight would be more the second half of the debate when we started getting into kind of like affordability and young
Yeah.
people and that's where I just think and this is something he can work on, but I just don't think he was really
Hmm.
connecting well with people as much. Um, a lot of it was still like the bullet points of like, okay, this is like the 5 things we're going to do, as opposed to like just showing that you get what people are going through
Yeah.
and you understand what young people
Right.
are dealing with. And I think that's something I would probably put as kind of like to work on before the next or before the general election debate if he wins the leadership.
Yeah, he has to connect to like the mom in Scarborough or like the parent in Surrey and help them understand, like make them feel that you get it. They don't need an economic argument as to like, his comment on it makes sense what he said, but like, this is happening because like we need more productivity. It doesn't like speak to someone who's having a hard time with like grocery bills and they're working really hard trying to like, but they still have to budget that. So I think he needs to find that human element to be like, yes, we get the economic argument, but he has to be like, yes, things are tough for Canadians right now. Here's my, and then kind of go into like in a more simple way, like why that's going to help.
Well, can I just say on that, I actually thought one of the sections where he had a pretty good run that got close to trying to provide, I think what you're saying there, Vandana, about something
Hmm.
that's very personal, was when he said, by the way, under my government, it'll be a great time to be a Canadian worker because we're going to build a lot of stuff and there's going to be a lot of good jobs and
Yeah, that was
it'll be a
good.
great time to be in the skilled trades. I just thought that was interesting because, it's interesting. I think we talked in one of our previous podcasts about how he had recently gone and done some visits to work sites with some union
Hmm.
leaders. I think maybe he actually took something from that, which he's now kind of folded into his messaging. I'm not. I wouldn't have thought that talking about skilled trades would have been something that he'd be on earlier on in the campaign. So I think it reflects an evolution, but it also, in some ways, maybe also learns a little bit of what the success of Doug Ford, right?
Hmm.
Who has really done a very good job of trying to show the visuals of the economy by putting on the work boots and the work hat and the orange vest, right? And
Yeah.
going around to work sites. Not saying that he's going to do that necessarily, but I think he realizes that to talk economy, you also have to talk jobs. And the way to
Yeah.
talk jobs is to show people actually the stuff you're going to build. And so uh, I've seen I think tonight we got the closest look at how he might put together a narrative. There was way too much talk. I think in some cases we talked about productivity. Also, I think too much talk on AI.
Yeah.
It's super important. It's super important to Canada's economic future. I'm just not sure that the average person looks and when they hear AI, that they think that's an economic positive. I think they actually worry about what that'll mean for their own job.
And they should have mentioned that. Like if they were
Yeah.
talking about AI, they should about ethical AI as well. I think also to add to the builder thing, the other thing that was interesting when I think of builders, I think of people in the innovation space. And I think while some people feel like we've ceded that to like techno bros like Elon Musk, there are Canadians here who, and in Canadian Silicon Valley, who want to come back here and help support Canada And they all see themselves as builders. It's different type of building, but they all see themselves the same way. And I think in a time where people feel very extremely patriotic, I think he was able to speak to people who maybe have felt that they haven't been reflected in the government, and can take back that, that only tech bros can own this space. And I think there's a lot of like women in the space that I think would appreciate that. And I think builders can be two things. And I think he was able to achieve both of that things.
Yeah, and one other one I thought he got close to where he needed to be was talking a bit about kind of healthcare workers. They had to, what they went through in COVID and coming out
Yeah.
of there, and that was again like connecting with people and showing you kind of get what they're going through. So I think there's a lot to work with, and I think he had
Yeah.
some good moments. And by and large, I think the English debate would be a B. Like I think there's things we can improve and there's things he can work on. But I can, coming out of that debate, I could see him in a debate against Pierre Poilievre and coming out on top. And if he works on a few of the style things, look, I think the reality is it will be a kind of like he's the guy who knows his stuff and he's not going to be
Hmm.
exciting, but if that's what Canadians want, like he delivered that tonight. So I can't imagine anyone who was already leaning towards Mark Carney in the Liberal leadership race looked at this debate tonight and said, "No, I don't like that." Like I think he certainly has what he already had. Did he get undecided voters? I don't know, but I think at the very least he certainly held the people he already had. I can't imagine anybody looked at him tonight and said, "No, like this guy
Hmm.
can't handle the job," which is kind of the benchmark. Can he handle himself against Poilievre? And I think coming out of the debate, you'd say, yeah, he could handle himself against Poilievre. Do you want to talk about Karina Gould? How do we think she did tonight?
Best communicator on the stage.
Yeah. I think
She was the
she
best.
stole the show.
Yeah,
I
no
agree.
question.
We can elaborate, but I would
Let's
say,
elaborate then. We got some
sure.
time.
I would say with Karina, I think today I mean, she was great yesterday too. Sure, her fluency is great, but I would say she looked a bit more in charge today. Like I saw a bit more of that like prime ministerial look to her, and I think the way she
Yeah.
spoke was well. And I think while we talked about progressiveness, I like how she owned it. I
Mhm.
like how, and I worry sometimes that liberals are talking too much. And it's a generational thing I find about centrism. And I think the problem I have with that word is that what does it mean? To some people, they're thinking fiscal centrism, which is fine. I think to some people, I'm like, does that mean you don't want reconciliation? Does that mean you don't want childcare? Does that mean we don't talk about plights of, injustice or cross-racialized people? Like that's what people worry about. So I actually don't like that term. So I like how she owned things like, while I do think, the carbon tax has been a political issue, I like how she owned it on principle. I like how she talked about human stories, and then said how she differentiated herself. She said, "My opponents, you hear this. With me, you're going to talk about people." And she kept relating the economy to people and how she's connecting that to people. And I think she was able to do that in a plain spoken way and be the person for social issues, and speak to young people who are concerned that, I think if Donald Trump isn't here and if the threat of terrorists isn't taking place, we might be having a very different conversation. So I think it's important to talk about these things because should any of these things move, a week in politics is like years. Anything can shift. Like look at the polling now
Seven
versus a month
weeks.
ago. Exactly. So I mean, I'm saying like I think I like how she owned that, and I think should Carney take this, he should make her number two and campaign with her and make her the person who helps get the young people out and get women out. And I think she's an effective communicator. I think she also, I liked her calculator, like you can't bring a calculator to a knife fight, which I think was a hit to Carney. She did a couple of those pieces that weren't like hard swipes, but they showed her ability to like push back, fight back, and really elaborate on her ideas and her vision. I thought her closing was very strong, especially when she said like, "I'm a new generation of a leader, and the future is now." And I thought that closing line was very good. I think regardless, I'm glad she ran for this. I think it'll really help elevate her presence and her brand. But yeah, I think if anything can come out of it, I think she did the best.
Tyler,
Yeah.
what do you think of her tonight?
Yeah, look, she was daring, right, in a few places. She decided to go for it and push back on Carney on a few things, and I think
Hmm.
she didn't trip him up fundamentally. Like I don't think he comes out of this actually, I think, in very good shape. But she did raise some legitimate substantive points, right? Like for example, on defense, she I think very effectively said, "Look, you're saying that it's super important for us to invest in defense because this is, a critical time to show that we can be a serious player in the world, but yet you're not going to reach 2% of NATO spending until 2030, right? These things don't kind of make sense. He had a response, but my point is like that's probably the most pushback that he's received in the entire campaign.
Yeah, I mean, she was
right?
the only person who did
Yeah.
any kind of
Yeah.
like pushback
Yeah.
to
No,
other candidates either night. Yeah.
and she did it in multiple different places throughout. It was gentle but effective. And I
Yeah.
think it proves the skill that we've all talked about in a previous podcast about how, as a former House leader and as somebody who's been on her feet many times in question period, she's very practiced at being able to deliver a political attack in ways that doesn't feel divisive and feel negative, which I think is an asset, especially as we're trying to put a more hopeful kind of view on the party going forward, especially if it looks like we are in a position potentially to hold government. I would say as well, she did a really, really good job of also standing up for a certain segment of voter who, yes, wants change, but also thinks Justin Trudeau did some really important things. And that is the complicated reality that I think a lot of people who are voting in this leadership race are going to find themselves in, is that they want to change. They wanted the prime minister to go, but they also fundamentally kind of like the legacy that he has produced and liked the government that he has produced. There are some things they would change, but generally was quite comfortable with it. And she kind of very effectively walked that line of speaking to those people saying, we've done some important stuff. She gave the best explanation, arguably in favor of the carbon price, that I've ever heard, including from ministers of our own government, even our environment minister, right? And yet, it's not necessarily like her conclusion, which is we should maybe not be so quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Not the conclusion that I reach, but like it was the most convincing argument politically that I've heard from anybody in the course of the last number of years. And she was also really good at saying, guys, we fucked up a few times. We fucked up on inflation. Like we were not quick enough off the mark. Now, does she have credibility in saying that as somebody who was part of a cabinet? Obviously, that's a question. But I think because she is so different as a candidate in this race, she had a lot of free space and she used it very effectively.
Yeah, I think hands down, she's proven to be the best communicator in the leadership race. And maybe in the entire government, just from what she's been putting out the last couple of weeks and how she did in the debates here tonight. That carbon tax moment, I had the exact same reaction as you did, Tyler, because I would, if I was writing the Liberal platform for the next election campaign, I would say like exactly what Carney did, like scrap the consumer carbon tax. I don't want to touch it. It's very difficult to argue that like this is a good thing, but then argue you're also going to pause it. Like it just doesn't make intuitive sense to me. So I like jettison that thing and get it away from here. Yet I thought she was way more compelling than the other candidates when that topic came up, because she actually talked about, conviction and I'm a mom of two kids and the earth is burning. We can't turn our backs. Like it's like this is actually like really powerful stuff. And then she talked about the rebate, which is again, like we said, we should have been like how we should have been selling this thing in the past. And I would say the same thing with defense spending. We had this conversation on the podcast too. I think it's crazy to try to like reach the 2% target in 2 years or 3 years without blowing the budget. But she was actually quite forceful in terms of making that case against Carney, whereas I actually like Carney's position better. But coming out of that exchange, I think she came across sounding better than him. Like Carney, even at the end, was kind of wavering. He's like, well, I said 2030, but maybe sooner if we could do it sooner. Like she actually kind of knocked him a little bit off his position there because she was so forceful. So I think she's proven herself to be maybe not the ideal candidate for a general election based on her platform and her connection to Trudeau and her, speaking positively of the Liberal record and all that, but certainly the strongest communicator in this field of candidates.
Yeah.
And I would also say, much tougher in the English debate than the French debate. Like, I think the French debate, like you said, Vandana, like she was kind of more the friendly progressive, and this time it was like, I think you said like she's the boss tonight. Like she actually came with like the House leader toughness, which was I think very helpful too in that first half when it was like not the issues where like you would expect her to hold her ground, which is Trump and tariffs and things like that. But I think she just because she sounded tough, she largely held her ground there.
Yeah.
Anything on Frank in the English debate?
My pickleball companion. At the end of this, I want to play I do actually want to play pickleball with him. Like
he probably will do it with you.
Yeah, we've got to. I don't even know if he plays pickleball, but anyway, he has bought himself into a serious contender. I don't know where he's going to end up in terms of percent of vote. There's always the candidates, right, who they contribute more to the race in quality and substance than is reflected necessarily in their vote total. But if you just were looking to evaluate him as a candidate based on his debate performance, he deserves to be on that stage. He had a good night. He had an excellent night in French, obviously because he's probably the best French speaker. We'll talk about that in a minute, but like he had very substantive views, somewhat different views on things like taxation. He had a weird comment about Ireland. It's like he was praising it. I would argue it's a tax haven, but whatever. But like he had substantive views on everything from monetary policy to productivity to taxation to healthcare. He was, in fact, his whole section on healthcare. I was saying in our chat, like he could be the health minister at some point in time. Like you could see the substance there, that he has a vision of what he wants to achieve, especially because of his own experience in the private sector in some of those issues. I think he's bought himself a serious role. The question will be, does he want to run again?
Yeah. I would agree with that assessment. I think his, I don't think anything he said stood out or was able to get him forward. But I think he did better in the French debate because, and we'll talk about that next, but the issues that came up that he was able to litigate better in. But I felt like, again, I saw a tweet that said, like, usually fringe candidates are kind of like weird. They don't get a lot of attention, but Frank Bales looks like someone who is competent, who is strong, who has good ideas to bring, and would probably add value.
Yeah, there's nobody in either debate on the stage who looked out of place, who didn't know
Yeah.
their files, who was tripping up on their words or anything.
Was
It's like they think of like you watch the debates even for like people running for like the presidential, like Republican nomination, Democratic nomination, like Rick Perry's forgetting his policies, and like people are tripping over like their own policies, and like everyone knew their stuff and everybody had an answer to everything.
Yeah.
I think Bayless, I agree, like stood out more in the French debate. He was pretty invisible tonight.
Yeah.
In the French debate, I think he did say a few things actually. He was the most compelling on
Yeah.
Bill 21, on
Yes.
96. He mentioned, his Palestine position. I'm not saying
hmm
it's the right position, but like he stood out and he actually like took
Yep.
some strong stands that might
He
actually
was
get
the
him some
clearest.
support. Yeah, he was very clear.
He was
I think
clear in
that's
all
the way to put
three.
it. And I think that could actually get him some support, maybe coming out of some of the positions he took for people who feel strongly about those issues.
Yeah. On his French, I think where he was able to do, I think on Bill 21, on Bill 96, and on the Middle East, I think the frustration that many people have is that politicians don't say anything. They all sound pretty much the same like language that's kind of doesn't say one thing or the other, tries not to offend everyone. And I think he was just clear. So while I think that can polarize some people, I think for others it would have been seen as refreshing.
Greetings, Canadian Political Pod listener. I'm your narrator, Gary, an artificial intelligence-generated voice. Exciting and serious sounding is what we typed in the AI voiceover input field. And boom, Gary exists. Hey, do you know what's not artificial? Not even one bit? The highly influential audiences air quotes media podcasts offer to its advertisers. And I say that with all the sincerity a machine learning, data-optimized, predictive network of interconnected neural nodes can muster. Whether your ad message is on Curse of Politics, the Burly, Hotel Pacifico, or the brand new Race to Replace, you will be reaching cabinet ministers, members of parliament, the political class, the C-suite, and corporate Canada, leading journalists, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. People saying this is a unique political moment is underselling it. Policy is under scrutiny. A party leader is being voted on. The Ontario election is underway. There will be a new prime minister. And then there's the guy living in the White House who calls us the 51st state. Does anyone remember another time like this? I'm instantly scouring millions of data points to answer my own rhetorical question. No, you do not. This is when you need to get your message to the decision makers. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com. You'll be dealing with Jill and Todd, who are real, not artificial at all people, and generally very friendly. Well, Jill is anyway. We're still deciding about Todd.
I think we've moved into the French debate now. Tyler, what's your assessment? Who do you think did the best? What's the take home from the French debate?
So I'm looking at this obviously from the perspective of somebody who's been in the French immersion system as a student and who lived for 5 years in Montreal. I
And please,
thought that
please, please give all your comments in French for this portion of the podcast.
Um, so look, Bayless obviously, I think we all agree had the best French. I think there
Hmm.
were moments where at times Gould had the best French, second best French, and followed by Chrystia. They both were very good for different. In it sounds different to a different audience, in terms of what you're looking for. I do think Carney obviously struggled. It was passable. Like I don't think that you would take away from the French debate that he couldn't be on that stage, or he couldn't, for example, do a Tout le monde en parle interview, which I think is the kind of like the baseline expectation of what a leader of any of the major parties has to be able to do if they're going to be competitive in Quebec, especially for us who need somewhere around 30 plus seats in the province. But I would just say it does still need a bit more work. I will say, interestingly, I did hear from a number of Francophone MPs afterwards, because I solicited their views of, like, what did you think? They actually were very complimentary of his French. So to the extent that that matters, I think people largely came away with whatever concerns or expectations they needed to have satisfied in that debate in terms of his French, that they were.
Yeah, I think for French, but similar, I would say Carney definitely struggled. I think there were times where, wasn't sure if he fully grasped like the question, for example, or he missed out like a preposition. So things like that, but I do find that I live in Quebec that Quebecers are very forgiving, especially if you're
Yes.
trying. Like they do appreciate you trying, and like sometimes, I speak and it's fine. Sometimes they'll help me along, and that's great too, but they appreciate it. So, is he ready for Tout le monde en parle? Can he speak colloquially? Like, probably not, but you can use proxies for that. Like, he can do what he needs to do for Quebec and send out Melanie Joly or Francois Philippe Champagne and like help build those supports and like legions and whatnot. And I think, again, as long as he's trying, it helps. I remember when Chrystia Freeland had Russier French, and
Oh
she
yeah.
really put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah.
And here we are. Chrystia, I think her French was good. Like, she definitely has a lot more practice. I think she can think of it. I think both her and Carney, I noticed, were just slower, a bit more formal. So, and like it was just harder for them to get their points across in that regard. And I think that's where obviously Bayless and Karina were a bit different. Bayless obviously is fluently bilingual, but I think Karina was able to humanize stories. She was able to like speak off the cuff. She was able to like, it almost looked like she was able to think in French very quickly, where it sometimes looked like the others were trying to conjugate on the spot. So I think like for just like everyday French speaking, I think those two did a bit better.
Yeah, I
And
think
can
I
we
think
just, sorry, Dad, I just think to build on Vandana's point about how Quebecers do give you sometimes a bit of the doubt, and I experienced that as well as somebody who lived in Montreal for 5 years. That remember, Jack Layton, right, didn't have the best French. It was good enough. It was good enough for Tout le monde en parle. That's where he got his start, right? And so if that's the standard, I think Carney may be okay.
I think the difference is like for the Liberal Party, they need to like go
Yes.
through Quebec to win. So hopefully he can up it. But again, if he has enough strong Quebec presence that can help, fill those gaps, I think that'll be good.
yeah, I think like I said, coming out of the English debate, I don't think anybody looked at Carney's performance and said
Yeah.
like this guy can't handle it. I think some people may have looked at his French debate performance and said, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And it's not so much that he was again. I think Quebecers would be largely forgiving, and it's not fatal. But when he's actually engaging with like Blanchette in a debate, like how is he going to
Yeah.
hold up there? How would he do on Toulouse and Parle? I think it's a safe bet. The Liberals will not be pushing for a TVA debate in addition to the consortium debate in French, as we had the last two election campaigns, and weirdly have been given both times. So
And the
I
Prime Minister
think.
always won those debates, right? Remember
Well, I
that,
know that's
like,
why we kept pushing for them
yeah.
because like Trudeau's always going to win the French debate, right? Whereas
Hmm.
I think that's not a given here by any means for Carney. So I think that's a concern. Though maybe with everything else going on in the world, like ultimately, like you said, like they probably feel like he's put a good effort in, and he's from Northwest Territories in Edmonton, like he's doing his best. So I think people will be largely forgiven. I just worry more about how he would handle like an intense cross-examination.
You
Um, and then I think also, the challenge is because it's his second language, it's harder again for him to kind of like really connect with people. And that's probably the bigger challenge. Like Quebecers what Jack Layton had was he was able to connect with Quebecers, right? He seemed like a guy who like, he's cheering at the Habs games and drinking
Yeah.
beer and like seemed like
Yeah.
one of us. Whereas, Carney again, I just think was maybe missing some of those moments. There was an exchange on immigration there, which I made a note of when it happened. Earlier in the exchange, Frank Bayless had talked about, his parents immigrating to Canada and why this was important to him, and told the
Hmm.
whole story of that. And
Yeah.
Karina Gould talked about, oh, my grandparents came with $5 and Canada welcomed them.
Everyone had the immigrant story
And then
after
and
that.
now their granddaughter is a minister in the government. What a wonderful country we live in. And Mark Carney's was he said three things. One, I'm the grandson of immigrants. Two, this is how I'm going to improve immigration. Three, and like he just sort of like tossed out the I'm the grandson of immigrants without explaining it again. So this is again like you got to connect with people and tell a bit of a story and like flesh it out a little bit more. I think in both debates he got there a little bit when he's talking about the Arctic and I'm from the Northwest
Mhm.
Territories. So again, like lots of potential. This is all fixable. But I think probably more so in French than English. Like you gotta at least connect with people and tell them a bit
Yeah.
about like who you are as a person.
I think in Quebec, Carney was able to like just get the cues. Like Metro knew is an important like phrase in Quebec. Talk about Hydro-Quebec. He talked about little towns and things that like would mean things to Quebecers. And I felt like he was able to do that. Like he knew like these are things I have to hit in with like a lack of French. I will also say I think Carney is the most disciplined person I've ever met. And I feel like he will now make it his mission to be as fluent as possible.
Yeah, for sure. And I think to your point, I think he's getting very good briefings from his Quebec team. And even the Maître chez nous, like he's
Yeah.
very well written speeches. And even when like when we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, he did the ride along with Champagne and he was like referencing Quebec singers and things like that. So
Yes.
he's certainly committed and he's I think got that potential to connect with Quebecers for sure on those types of things.
Can I,
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
before, well, sorry, and I just want to pick up on one little thing before we probably finish with the whole debate discussion. There was a weird piece right at the end of the English debate about like the way you would run the party as a leader. And it's weird we actually didn't spend very much time in any of the debates
Mm.
talking about internal party renewal, caucus relations. Carney made a very interesting comment about how he said, I actually spend time with my caucus colleagues or the folks in the caucus who support me to hear their perspectives. I've heard, by the way, that all the candidates are doing a version of that and actually giving caucus members a lot of space to define what they want to see on policy. I thought that was a really interesting thing because, obviously, like the whole relationship between PMO and caucus was part of kind of what brought us here a little bit to having this leadership race. And it just is interesting that that was the only moment in these two debates that we heard any of that discussion.
Yeah, I think, and to that point, I think this is a fear of government-itis. I think
Yeah.
everyone loves the grassroots during campaigns. Everyone needs their caucus members to build rallies for you. They
Yeah.
need you to like figure things out, especially because he's such a newbie and he wouldn't have like a background, like an organizer in like Calgary, and he wouldn't have these kind of things. And he leans on his caucus. He just needs to continue that and find a format for that when he goes back into government, and make sure that that's still like there needs to be someone on his behalf and he needs to build those relationships authentically.
Yeah. I guess because I was a little hard on her in the English debate, I actually thought Freeland did pretty good in the French debate. I think she had probably the best stage presence up there. Like she seemed like she was in control of the debate. Like it was all kind of
Hmm.
coming through her. She was answering, jumping in when the moderator asked questions. She seemed, I said this last week, like I think in the debate, you want someone who looks confident. She looked very confident, I
Yeah.
thought. Well, in both debates, but I think especially in the French debate. So I think she did a good job by and large in that debate. One thing I want to get your opinion on here. So I was talking to someone else today about the French debate, and he said he was like, it was just like, why was Chrystia like helping Mark Carney out? It was like mom and dad the whole time. Like it was like, oh no, dad didn't mean to say that about Hamas, and like she's like finishing his sentences and like helping him out there, and and I don't know if she was doing this as like a passive aggressive way to kind of like shine a light on Carney not knowing French words. But after watching the English debate, I think she may have been genuinely trying to like help him
Yeah.
out in the debate.
This is a common problem for a lot of women, I find. And I'm not saying like I think if another dude was there, they would be like, dude, you're gonna burn. I'm just gonna let you sound stupid, and then that's fine. I genuinely think she was trying to help. And I think this is something that, and some people will say, she shouldn't have done that. She should have just let him have it. I think she's actually genuinely, I mean, they look like they had a lot of care for each other. And I think she
Well, the
definitely,
moderator even called her Mrs. Carney at one point.
Well, they've
So
known each other.
you may have
They've known
picked
each
up on
other for a
that.
very long. Like they do know each other for a very long time.
I also think, so I think, again, first, it's very common for a lot of women to just be like, I'll fill the gap. And I think that's what she was trying to do. I also think, given there was criticism of her and how she dealt with the situation, the prime minister, and her early interviews about just focusing on that, I think she was trying to showcase that, like, regardless, like, all of us have to win together at the end, right? So if he burns, like, we all burn, so we all need to, like, work together. So I think she was trying to show that that camaraderie across. But I do think she was trying to be helpful.
Yeah. And look, I mean, she said she's going to run again, and
Yeah.
take her at her word. Like, she probably is thinking about the good of the team. And, as I said before, like, she certainly did not go at Carney at all.
No.
And, you can either take that as an indication that she has concluded she's not going to win and wants to kind of bring the party together afterwards, or maybe you can conclude that she thinks she is winning and can run a front runner campaign. I don't know, but like, it was very noticeable that, like,
Yeah.
she really didn't take any kind of remote, even indirect shots at him in either debate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything
and I
else
think
from the debates? Yeah, do you want to?
Well, I think there was, and in some ways, this may have actually been to the disadvantage of them and perhaps to the format of the debate. I think there was this self-policing that all of the candidates went into it with, that they did not want to give the Conservatives clips that could be used against the party, like, in very quick order, even potentially in real time during this leadership race, because it's so close potentially to when we go to an election. And in some ways, again, I understand why that's right, and probably that is in the best interest of the party over the course of the next number of weeks and months. But I think if you're a voter trying to figure out what you're going to do, and the decision that you're going to make is more than just informed by what polling tells you, I'm not sure that the debates necessarily, beyond giving you like a substantive kind of run through of policy, I don't think it told you anything necessarily about how they want to differentiate themselves between each other. And I think that was a lost, I really do think that was a lost opportunity in this respect of the debates.
Okay. Well, I think that covers our debate recap. And we have got a very special Mulcair Minute.
I know more than most, believe me. My analysis, as someone in politics for a long time, I think that Mr. Charest is going to make very quick work of Pierre Poilievre.
So this is what brings me the most joy from the debates, because CTV had a lot of commentators, including Tom Mulcair, live tweeting the debate. So while I was watching the debate, I also had my CTV browser open, and I was just hoping that Tom Mulcair would give us a Mulcair Minute that we could use. And in fairness to Tom Mulcair, I actually agree with most of his commentary from the evening. I think he actually had a pretty good grasp on what was going on in the debate. But I did find one comment that he made that I think is a good fitting Mulcair Minute. And for those who don't know, the Mulcair Minute is like, we want to call it a pundit who has a really bad take, as Tom Mulcair often does. So this is what Tom Mulcair tweeted at one point. Gould pushing for more ideas like those the Liberals put forward in 2015 as a way of getting young voters back into the Liberal fold. Isn't that why they've left? Says Tom Mulcair. And this was when Karina Gould was saying, hey, we need to do more of what we did in 2015. We need to be bold. We need to excite young people. That's how we'll get young voters back. Vandana, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I'm very expressive. Sorry, guys. It's because I'm Indian. Wrong. 100% wrong. And the reason I say that is because I think young people came to us because we had bold ideas, and I think they slowly scattered because perhaps we didn't fulfill all these bold ideas like electoral reform. I think they felt like we could have went farther on things like reconciliation. I think they went farther on things like on the environment. I remember when we bought the pipeline, there was a lot of like commentary around that. And I think their issues changed. Like, I mean, if you look at millennials then and now a lot of them have kids, they want homes, or they have homes, and they're dealing with affordability. And I think the reason why young people pull right isn't because of these ideas. I think they feel the system does not work for them. And a lot of times the far right is saying the system does not work for you. So people are intrigued with like, okay, well, yeah, like this system isn't working for me. I'm working all the time. I know a young person, one of my friend's kids, he has like a full-time job, a couple side gigs, still lives at home, and just won't have the life that he wants for himself. And it frustrates him. So I actually think he's wrong because I think what they want is bold ideas. They want us to help fix the system, not just defend it, but like, these are our values. This is like they want to be like, well, what are you gonna do about it? Are you gonna make it better? Are you saying this is just gonna be my life? And they want something bold and something refreshing. And the problem with as you work through government, other things come at you, like Ukraine, a Middle East, like Donald Trump, like there's a COVID, like there's a number of things that take your attention away that prevent you from still generating new ideas and becoming fresh and whatnot. So I firmly disagree with this. I actually think whoever wins needs to have a really strong youth outreach plan and put together bold ideas and really showcase that, we want to listen to your ideas. And I learn a lot from Gen Z. Like my staff tell me a lot of great things and I'm like, that's smarter. Why am I wearing skinny jeans? That seems dumb. Like, why wouldn't I be comfortable? I just think they have great ideas and they want to be heard. And they didn't leave us because we didn't have great ideas. They left because they felt like we were not fulfilling those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the reason that young people went to the Liberal Party and not to Tom Mulcair's NDP in 2015 was because of these things, right? And this is what we get back to. That's the point I think Karina was trying to make, is that the party kind of became a government and drifted away from those things. You need to kind of rekindle that energy and those ideas.
We also became sometimes scared to bring it. Like we used to lean into risk, and then you kind of get scared when you're polling. People are pulling back. You're like, oh, I don't know. Should we be talking about these things? Is it too woke? Like there are things like that come up. And her argument is that we should be authentically liberals.
Okay. Well, all I wanted in our 9-episode run of this podcast.
We have validated this
Tom
segment.
Mulcair Minute that featured Tom Mulcair. So we have 2 episodes left, but I think we could just close the podcast right now and I'd be happy. But we can at least close the episode on a high note there, because it is time to stop the clock. This is the end of the episode. We'd like to kind of give somebody credit who had a good week, did something well, who nailed it. Who wants to go first and shout somebody out?
I want to specifically recognize the folks, the tireless volunteers who are still working behind the scenes on the various rules committees that are administering this race. They obviously had a very controversial issue that they had to deal with last week with Dr. Ruby Dalla's qualifications. And I think we all know some of the folks who are on that committee. There have been folks outside of the party and Dr. Dalla herself who have tried to make this into a racial issue. And there are lots of diverse people who sit on those committees. They did their job perfectly. They did the proper due diligence. They went through an appeals process. And I just want to say, regardless of the outcome, without prejudice to the outcome, thank you for your work as volunteers to the party, because that is exactly the kind of impartial process that we need.
Tyler, you're so sweet. You always remember the volunteers.
Well said. Well said.
I have one too, and we talked a bit about it. We had the Chrystia ad, but we didn't talk about the Mark Carney ad. And this ad is, if people have not seen it, it's an ad of his daughter. And she talks about what people might hear about their father. And they pulled some of those old quotes. And it's funny because we talked about it in one podcast where you don't bring up what the opposition says about you, but they did. And she said, she talks about how it's hard to know the truth. And the truth is, my dad's the hardest working person that you know. And she talked about how, they should be scared because he wants to make Canada, like he wants to serve Canada and he wants to make Canada better and build. And she had all this great humanizing stories about her father. Chrystia Freeland, we talked about, it was her, on a horse with a farm, Peace River, really showing her in her element. I actually think she's actually most comfortable in places like that, which is why she refers to rural Canada so often. And I think they're both really good ads. I think the difference between the two of them, I think for Chrystia, she was talking about herself and almost like an introduction that I agree should have happened years ago. Whereas I think it's easier to have someone else's perspective on the candidate, because it doesn't sound it's coming from you. It's someone who's talking about the reflection of you. And the way she was talking, I would hope my daughter talks about my husband that way, right? And I think, with his brother, with his daughter, I think that raises a different human element to him that that really taps into like, oh, that guy's interesting. And maybe he doesn't come off like that on the debate stage, but I find those testimonials are very authentic. So I think they did a really good job on that. I think both are good, but I think Carney's gets a little bit ahead because I think it's just easier to someone else to find that candidate.
And when I saw that ad, the one that you're referring to from Carney, like when I saw it, I thought immediately it's to do all those things that you just referenced, but also it serves to introduce him in a kind of an understandable and accessible way to young people, right? Which is going to still be
Very good
an
point.
uphill battle in the next.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll keep mine just, I guess, on the debate since that's what we talked about all night here. I think, there's two ways to kind of grade debates, and this is in general elections what happens too, right? You say like, well, the front runner didn't get knocked off, so the front runner won the debate. And I think, by any kind of like measure like that, you would say Carney probably came out of these two debates in the best if he was in first place beforehand, which I think he was. Nothing happened that really shook him loose. So I think you would say, Carney probably to that metric is the winner of the debates. But I think if you're just grading the debates as a totality, two debates together, who did the best? I think Karina Gould did the best in totality between the two debates there. And this is somebody who a lot of people said shouldn't run. Like, why are you bothering to run?
And she raised
It's
the
not your
money.
time. You're not going to raise the money. And I think, she raised the money. And I think by getting on the stage and actually performing there, she has proved those people wrong who said she shouldn't have been in this race, and certainly shows she belongs in this race. So, yeah, good job. Good job to her on two very good debate performances. All right. Another reminder to people, when you're listening to this podcast, the polls will be open. You can start voting in the Liberal leadership race if you're a registered Liberal. We'll maybe talk about the whole process and the Canada Post thing next week on the podcast. But if you're listening to this and it is Wednesday morning or later, you can now vote in the Liberal leadership race. So get out and vote, but we will still be back next week for the next leg of the race to replace. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, Airbnb, and we will see you next week on the race to replace.